To hear. I'm Melanie Keenan, and it is my pleasure to bring you the full lineup for this week. Let me tell you, we're going to have informative conversations about what is going on in the state of America. We're going to have a new point of views with a new person speaking on Truth to Hear at Truth Talk, um, one-on-one conversation. She's never been on our show before, so it'll be good to bring someone on that you don't know and have not heard of. And then we have an encouraging message and also a Bible study. So let's get right to the point. Let's give you this week's preview. Tomorrow, that's Tuesdays at 2 o'clock, we have Truth Talk, and that is with Brandy, Bill, and I. And I'm going to tell you what, you do not want to miss this one because we're going to talk candidly about the state of America. Now, I will tell you this, me, Brandy, Bill, we do not agree with everything that each other believes is going on with President Trump versus President-elect Biden or the COVID-19 circumstances, but we have found a way, and what we want to do is show you how we can disagree politically, we can disagree with the things that our governments are doing or not doing in our responses as citizens. But what we agree on, the foundation of the biblical principles, the foundation of humanity, that's where we come together. And it'll be interesting to see this week how that happens because this stuff is fueling fires in people. It is causing people to rise up in ways that they never expected to have to or to want to. The Capitol was infiltrated. It was attacked. The desperation for justice for those who believe that injustice is happening not only with the election, but also with the way state to state, city to city mandates on the very livelihood of American citizens, the double standard of racism. We're going to look into all of that while those in power stay resilient. They stay focused on their agenda. Heck, they're even pushing even more agenda now than they ever were. And unexpectedly, we're going to look at the racial bias that was shown to the American people this past week. Here's pictures. Let me show you. Here's a picture. Everyone's seen this probably by now. But here's the police not holding weapons, not shooting in the air, not tear gassing, not water pluming. They are just holding the barrier. The silence is because you and I both know that less aggressiveness by people who are petitioning or protesting the murder of Black men was met with much more aggression than just holding the line. I didn't expect it to come up as a racial issue when I first saw the news, when I first watched what was happening at the Capitol. I thought it was a state of emergency for all people. But then I have to say, at first I was probably like you, wait a minute, it's not about race. And no, what happened Wednesday was not about race. But what we saw, the reaction of those in power, the reaction of those who could call the National Guard but chose not to, the reaction of the police who didn't feel as threatened by people that were doing a lot more damage. I mean, look at this. Look at this picture. You have them holding people off at the doorway where our representatives were. And what was our representatives doing? Let me see. This, cowering down. We're going to talk with Bill and Brandy, and I want your input tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Is this showing a truer state of the bias of our political system towards people of color? Or is it just, what do you think? Do you think it's just another ploy to bring up division in America? Because I don't know. When you have, I'm going to show this picture. When you have pictures, I don't know if you can see it. I don't know if you can see this man right here, if you can see where I'm pointing at. He is a police officer holding the doors open for the protesters to leave as they shout. To leave as they shout. Now, let me ask you this. As they're walking out the door, according to the New York Post article taken January 7th, a woman shouted, "We made it. Woohoo!" Another person shouted, "Next time we'll be back and we won't be peaceful." And they were allowed to walk out the door, threatening to come back with violence. Now there's media about FBI wants help finding these people. Well, I can tell you, at rallies regarding equality for Black people and people of color in general, they didn't have to go find people because they rallied them like cattle to police jails. They didn't open a doorway and say, "Hey, go on." I know for me, I watched video footage. I know people who were at rallies, and, it was horrendous listening to my daughter on the phone with helicopters over her head and police on all sides of her when she went to peacefully protest. She didn't have weapons. She didn't have a backpack that you didn't know was a bomb or not. She didn't have anything but herself. And she was coerced like cattle by helicopters, by SWAT, by rubber bullets, in fear of her life. But you have these people who are allowed to dismantle the Capitol, who were allowed to stand in the presence of police officers with backpacks on, who were allowed to make our representatives cower in fear. And the police opened the door for them to go out. We're going to talk about that this week because it is just something that I find deplorable. No, the protest, the attack on the Capitol of our United States of America was not a racial protest. It was not a racial attack. But it did shed light on the extreme bias of those in power in our America. Well, we're also going to shift gears and talk about what did the government do since the riots. What did they do since the riots? Well, they silenced President Trump. They took him off of all media platforms. Do you agree with that or not? I want to hear what you think about that. And not only that, they also took down social media called Parler, where you read news and speak free. It wasn't censored. It wasn't like Twitter and Facebook, where you get censored and you get warned or you get taken down. They allowed people to speak freely. Now, there are some people who believe that freedom of speech is something that can only be done if you agree with a narrative or agree with the majority. But I don't believe that that's freedom of speech. We'll see what my co-hosts think about that. Now, are you allowed to say things that are insightful? Are you allowed to threaten people or threaten entities? Well, I'm going to tell you what, I've received threats before. My family has received threats before. There's other government officials that have received threats before, and they were not completely wiped out off of social media. We'll talk about that because there's a fine line. There's a right, there's a wrong, there's a fine line. But is that loss of freedom of speech going to trickle down to you and I? Do you think? Because I don't know. I kind of think that maybe it will do exactly that. Trickle down to you and I. Not only the loss of freedom of speech, but they're also stopping funding. Funding. Look at this headline. Marriott, Morgan Stanley, Dow, and other U.S. firms are cutting off donations to Republican politicians that opposed Biden's certification as president. So if you don't agree with what President-elect is getting or what he did to get it presidents-elect, if you have a different understanding of what happened, you don't even get funding as a Republican representative. How is that possible? I thought we had Republican and Democrat because there was two sides and anyone can choose which side they were on. There was two ways we wanted to see democracy at work. So you had a Republican and you have a Democratic Party. But now if you disagree with the Democratic Party, you lose your funding as a representative. Not only to Donald Trump, but to any Republican who in the past or in the recent has agreed that there was voter fraud. If you spoke up against that, if you agreed with Donald Trump in any way about the fight to retain him presidency, you will lose your funding. Donald Trump's campaign was canceled. The funding of it was canceled by Stripe, who processed the payments. They will no longer be able to do that. Twitter is canceled. Apple, Google, and Parler. If you're happy with this, even Shopify has removed all accounts associated with Trump. Now listen, if you're a Trump follower or not, or do you really think that everyone associated with Trump, do you think that everyone who voted for Trump is responsible for what happened on Wednesday? Because that's what they're saying is, hey, if you were a congressman or congresswoman or senator or anyone in the Republican Party that is on Trump's side before Wednesday, then guess what? You will not get funded. Well, let me tell you how you're going to have two parties without funding. We're going to have just a Democratic Party going forward. We'll talk to Bill about that because he is the history and political wisdom of our conversations. But that's what we're going to talk about. Impeachment. Are they going to impeach Trump? Why are they waiting to impeach him? Why not impeach him now? We're going to look at that. And is there any other avenue for Trump? or is impeachment like going to happen for sure? You know, there's people saying there's still hope that Trump stays in office. I don't know how that will happen. I don't know that that should happen. Um, we'll talk about that. We'll talk more about that. I don't want to give everything away today. This is a preview. So then going to Wednesday. Wednesday, we have a wonderful person. Let me get this off of her face, called Janette Branca. She is a dear friend of mine, more like family. We haven't spoken in many years, really, or seen each other in many years, spoken very few times in those years. But she is an amazing woman of God. Janette Brenke will join me on Truth Talk Conversation. That is Wednesday at 2:00. And it's gonna be uplifting. Jeannette is really someone who has taken God at his word, how she came back from a horrific car accident as a teenager and trusted God for abilities to come back in her physical body, beyond what was expected, and how her life is now trusting God through hardship and loss, but also trusting God for ministry, and how that ministry has just blossomed in her own life, and then positioned her to minister outside of herself. So we're going to have that conversation on Wednesday with Janette Branca. And then that leads us to Thursday. Now, Thursday, we have a deeper Bible study. We're talking about Revelation in the seven churches right now, and we're into the third church, which is Pergamum. But we've already talked about Revelation, Church of Ephesus and Smyrna. And the things that we look about, because we want to see what church do we relate to? What church are we in? So, like the Church of Ephesus, the things that the Lord had for them was perseverance. They persevered, they endured, but they didn't agree with evil. They stood their ground where the word of God was. They tested those who called them teachers. They didn't just believe everybody. They endured for the sake of Jesus and did not grow weary. And I'll tell you what, the one thing that was against the Church of Ephesus was that they left their first love. They left what they believed and what they did when they first began to be a follower of Christ. But I love that Jesus didn't leave them that way. Jesus instructed them, go back to what you did. Remember where you fell. Listen, some of us, we all get caught up in our daily lives. We all get caught up in our stress and our worries. And that's something that we know. And what we learn from the revelation to the Church of Ephesus is that Jesus knows where we have fallen. But sometimes we don't take the time to look at ourselves and say, hey, I used to read the Bible, now not so much. I used to have, faith that God would come through, and now I'm kind of walking in fear because so much has happened, so much has been allowed to happen. And then you would be kind of that Church of Ephesus. And the word to you is just go back to studying the word, go back to praying, talking to God, allowing him to come back into your life. And then we'll see the promises that we obtain when we do that. And then we also learned about Smyrna, the Church of Smyrna. Well, they're a little different. The Church of Smyrna, well, they knew, Jesus knew their tribulation. I'm going to tell you what, the Church of Smyrna, they were being persecuted. Jesus knew that. And he said, you know what? You're doing all right. You're doing all right. You're staying the course. And he didn't have anything against them, nothing against them at all. But he warned them. And see, I love this because Jesus warned them and said, hey, the devil's about to cast some of you into prison, that you may be tested and you'll have tribulation for 10 days. Jesus warned them, hey, trouble's coming. If you think that you're a Church of Smyrna member, well, you've You're doing what you know to do. Jesus has nothing against you. There's no reproof, but just warnings. Hey, you're on the right track, but you know what? Trouble's coming. And if Jesus warns you, then he also is going to give you everything you need to get through the trouble that's about to come. And what does he say when you persevere through the trouble in Christ? He says you get the crown of life. And you shall not be hurt by the second death. But he says you have to have ears to hear. This is just a little bit about what we're going and to talk about and where we're going with our Diving Deeper Bible study that is on Thursdays at 2 p.m. Join us for in-depth studies. I just gave you a little preview of what we've been doing, but it is much more. We have graphics and we have a look at the history. This week, we're going to look at the Church of Pergamum, which is the church of compromise. What did he reveal about those who compromise? Compromise is a good word when you're in a battle and you don't know what to do and two sides are against each other, but sometimes compromise could be a little bit too much wavering. We're going to look at that. We're also going to look at the fact that Pergamum was named the seat of Satan. Curious. What leader in history was inspired by the Church of Pergamum? Think about it. If you can message me on Thursday, what leader was inspired by the church or ruler inspired by the Church of Pergamum, which was known to be the seat of Satan, I will give you a free item of merchandise. So we're going to look at that on Thursday. And then, forgot to silence my phones. Friday, we have a weekly message. There's what you'll see coming up Friday at 2 o'clock, an encouraging message. And this week, we're going to talk about following the instructions of the Lord. Sometimes things happen so fast in our lives and we want to follow the instructions of the Lord, and it just seems to be like we're just reacting to everything. And we're reacting and reacting and reacting, and we're not doing what the Lord has set us to do, what he has trained us to do, what we know to do. Well, we're going to learn how to follow the instructions of the Lord, even in the midst of things getting out of control, because that's really where we find ourselves here today in this world that we're living in. So those are the highlights for this week. If you have an organization or a study or a show that you would like highlighted on Truth to Hear, then let me know. Message me, email me. You can email us at you can go on the website at www.truthtohear.com, or you can email me. Let me get that up. Here's the email at info@truthtohear.org, and we will respond and maybe highlight your business or your ministry or your website or YouTube channel on our next show. Thank you for joining me. It's a pleasure. I hope that you have earmarked either one or two or even all of our weekly daily dose of Truth to Hear. We look forward to communicating with you on our live shows. That is where we can chat and hear what you have to say. Have a blessed day and a very good week.